Okay, let's take a look at the custom cards. Dr. Boom scheme, summon a boom bot. It grades each turn, sure. Dr. Boom scheme, summon boom bots. 2 boom bots, upgrades each turn, sure. Mad Geniuses scheme. Boom bots. Boom scheme. Boom bots. The boom scheme. Boom bots. Boom's scheme. Dr. Boom scheme.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Yeah, a lot of you were inspired to create very similar versions of Dr. Boom's scheme for this round of the custom card reviews. That said, I did find 10 other designs I thought were really cool based on either Rise of Shadows mechanics or the theme. So we're going to talk about some pretty cool cards in this video. So up first here, let's take a look at a version of Dr. Boom. This is Diabolical Dr. Boom from Faroon. I do think it's pretty well known that it's going to be Blastmaster Dr. Boom for the actual card, but that doesn't matter, and this probably won't be the real artwork. This is more about exploring the mechanic here. This one's a 7 mana 7/7. It feels like Dr. Boom kind of has to be at this point. And its Battlecry reads, summon 2 Goblin Bombs and add 2 Goblin Lackeys to your hand. And I'm going to be upfront, like I think this is a really simple and really obvious design for Dr. Boom. Like it's a variation on the classic Dr. Boom with a little bit extra going on. And some of you might find that boring or pointless to put in a video like this, but I actually think it really captures the sort of design philosophies of Blizzard really nicely. They like to keep things simple and tight, and it's always a good reminder that custom cards often get way too complex when you guys submit them. You got like 47 different effects, 8 lines of text, and this is about as complex as it gets for Blizzard. So I think Faroon here captured a really realistic version of Dr. Boom. It's also one that just sort of evolves him into a new era. You've got Goblin Bombs instead of Boom Bots, which are still in standard format rotation with the Boomsday Project, right? So you're not kind of going back to the old GVG style of summons. You've also got Goblin Lackeys, which are now fitting because those are from Rise of Shadows. So you capture a couple different things here with Dr. Boom that modernize him, but still certainly reflect what we knew before. And interestingly, if you don't remember the Goblin Lackeys, those are the ones that give a minion +1 attack and rush. So they even enable you to empower the otherwise 0 attack Goblin Bombs that are getting summoned immediately. And it's a tight design that just fits together really nicely. So without overcomplicating things, Diabolical Dr. Boom just feels right. So now let's move on to Master of Schemes from King Kuba. This would be a 2 mana 2/3 neutral minion. Its Battlecry reads, upgrade your schemes once, wherever they are. And I love this card because we've seen all these scheme cards that upgrade each turn, and it feels like often they're just so bad when you top deck them, where it's just like, oh, I can't use this card if I top deck it. It's going to be awful. It's like the weakest version. And it usually takes, 2 or 3 turns of it upgrading for it to become a compelling card, but then it gets really cool really fast. So maybe a card like this could open up the opportunity to get your schemes moving quicker, make sure they're not totally dead top decks, but also sometimes just upgrade them in hand. So if you have like Hagatha's scheme, you play a couple master schemes along the way just because they're 2 mana 2/3s, they feel okay to play. You top deck your Hagatha scheme, and it's dealing 3 damage to all minions instead of just 1. And that's pretty solid off the bat. And then, it only takes 2 or 3 turns of it being in your hand for it to become absolutely ridiculous. So would most decks run a card like this? Absolutely not. I think a lot of decks would probably consider it too weak. But if there's some scheme that really lines up nicely with a game plan, or some deck that just has to have that control aspect of a scheme, perhaps like Hagatha, for instance, with Shaman, then a card like this could be really, really cool. So I like that it creates that opportunity to support an archetype, or not really an archetype, but a mechanic, and it does so in sort of a sideways direction. It's not obvious, but it's a good fit. I honestly would not be surprised at all if this exact card showed up in Hearthstone to support schemes. So now let's move on to another neutral 2 mana 2/3 that interacts with a new mechanic. I think both of these feel so real, so much like the essence of Hearthstone. Dalaran Dreamer here comes from Sea Viking Joe, and the Battlecry on it reads, give a random spell in your hand, twin spell. So we have another way here to support a new mechanic by giving something in your hand twin spell. Now what that means is It's random, so if you have 4 or 5 spells in hand, you don't really know what you're going to get. Sometimes it might be like a backstab and you're not really that excited. But, sometimes it might be like the mage quest reward, for instance, where you could get multiple extra turns in a row. And I know I just gave you like the one most broken example for a card like this. If that were to happen in wild format, I don't actually think it's the end of the world. It might be a little problematic, but you'd have to really finesse it down to that spell to make it work, so there are some challenges there. But beyond that, back in standard format, right, there are some potential crazy high rolls, a couple pyroblasts or something are pretty scary, but on average, you're not going to get anything too ridiculous, because remember, twin spell does mean you have to spend the mana twice. It's more of a resource thing than a tempo thing, and as we've seen in Hearthstone, generating extra resources in a small fashion isn't usually a problem. It's cheating out tempo that can feel really oppressive, or getting infinite resources, neither of which does Dalaran Dreamer allow you to do. Now, I want to note that a lot of people submitted cards like this where you gave spells in your hand twin spell, but most of them did it for every spell, and I thought that was just generating a little bit too much value. I like the more controlled, smaller portions with this card here, where it's just one spell at a time as opposed to everything. That seems kind of crazy to me. So it's not doing anything totally ridiculous. That to me means this card captured the idea of giving things twin spell the best. You might think, oh my god, my card did that too, but it probably went a little too far, a little too crazy. This one keeps it in check and makes it feel good, so that's why Dalaran Dreamer got the spot in the video. So moving on here, let's talk about Forbidden Shackling. We have another take on Forbidden, the priest mechanic. We already saw the real card, Forbidden Words. So of course, this could never exist in the game, but I think it's a really neat spin on that idea. It comes from Poodlefez. Of course, it's 0 mana, and it reads, spend all your mana, make a minion go dormant for that many turns. And I think this card is really crazy cool in a couple different directions. And I will say, I think this card is actually really strong as well, for the record, because, if you just spend 1 mana on this card, it can make something like a Lich King go dormant for a single turn. And that might sometimes be enough. That might be all you need. Just stalling into sort of like a Psychic Scream or other board removal, that Mass Hysteria, whatever it is, that might be enough, right? And I know that Lich King and Psychic Scream are going to be old examples very, very soon, so we're going to have to replace them, but you guys get the idea. I'm speaking generally of archetypal type cards here. So with Forbidden Shackling, maybe 3 turns is the magic number. It's like, I just can't deal with that right now. I have a couple mana left. In a pinch, 2 or 3 turns is enough. And it feels a bit like a sap, right? Where sap takes something out of play. The difference is with sap, right, they have to replay the card, they have to respin the mana, so it's worse than sap. Eventually, that thing is going to come back once it wakes up from its dormant state. So it's not like you got rid of it permanently, you're just stalling and buying yourself time. Some games, 4 or 5 turns, the game will end, it won't matter. So it will be a universal removal spell for 4 or 5 mana. It'll feel like some of the other single target removal spells we've seen in Hearthstone's past, but it's one of those things where it's like, you got to be careful. Is 3 turns enough? Is 5 turns enough? Do I need to go to 7 turns? Do I want to spend 7 mana? And of course, Forbidden style cards too, sometimes it can be hard to play it in the right order or play it with enough mana left, so you might have to waste a few mana points here and there to make things work, because it's like, I got to go to at least 5, but that's going to be a problem. Can't do these other things, so on and so forth. Beyond that, there's actually a cool synergy with this card. It does not say an enemy minion, it says minion. So you could even use this on friendly minions. You could Forbidden Shackling a Malagos to keep it alive for a turn, or keep it hidden for a turn so that it comes back to life on your turn, and then you could use the Malagos to do something really cool. It's almost like this universal stealth. So it's this bi-directional card that I think offers a lot of potential. Is it too good? Maybe. I think it's actually really, really strong, but it fits Priest really nicely. It fits the Forbidden mechanic very well, and I like all the different sort of interactions and scenarios that it creates. So to me, I think this card just has a lot of depth, a lot of interesting talking points. I'm of course curious what you guys have to say. If you think it's too crazy good, let me know in the comments. Even if it is, I don't really care. I just think it's a very interesting design. Moving on here, let's take a look at Backup Caller from Rob K, a 4-mana 3/3 neutral minion. The battlecry reads, for each enemy minion, add a random lackey to your hand. So we have a lackey generator here, but a lackey generator that's very dependent on your opponent's board state, which is something that I like. Like maybe this goes into a control deck to help you generate some additional resources while playing into the board. It feels a bit like, a mind control tech style card where it's good against wide boards of things. And, getting 3, 4, 5 lackeys out of it could be really good because I think the lackeys are worth more than 1 mana. So if you get a few, that's going to be some upside in the mid to long term over the next few turns of the game, or potentially at the same time if you play this in late game. The one problem for a card like this, right, is that it doesn't actually address the enemy minions on board, unlike things like Mind Control Tech, or, maybe I was thinking about a Dusk Breaker for a card like this. It's not dealing with them, so they're still out there, they're still causing you problems. All you really did is play an understated minion for some future upside, which means a vast majority of decks probably aren't going to want a card like this. But if you think about things like, Brawls or Mass Hysterias, there are some scenarios where you could play this into a board removal type card where it works out really nicely so that you get some extra resources while still also dealing with the board in an efficient fashion. So for instance, this could slot into a control warrior deck really nicely. You just toss it down with your brawl for 9 mana. Maybe you even toss in an extra lackey to help you win the brawl, and that's a really cool play. Maybe you play it into Mass Hysteria, so there's an extra minion taking hits in there and you're still getting 4 or 5 lackeys added to your hand. I don't know exactly how you'd use it, but I think it just fits the mechanic nicely. It gives lackeys to every class, which is cool. The name is, of course, perfect, and the artwork matches really nicely, too, where he's like, oh my god, I need backup. There's a lot of dudes I'm fighting against, and the backup are all the lackeys that get added to your hand. So, by no means do I think this is an incredibly strong card. I think it's an average, or maybe even slightly below average card. But that's fine. It's a good design. It matches all the different check marks and check boxes that I want a card to hit. So I think Rob K nailed it with this one. So now let's move on here to Torture Master Grazka from Rafam's Apprentice. This would be a new Priest Legendary, and we really haven't had many Legendary cards in this video compared to most. It would be a 3 mana 1/6, which is a Priest stat line Dream. And it reads, whenever this deals damage to a minion without killing it, reveal a card from the owner's deck. So if this trades into a Silverhand Recruit, nothing is going to happen. But if it trades into a Firefly, you're going to reveal a card from the owner's deck. And we've seen the reveal mechanic before. The card just pops up and it shows it to you, so you see what it is. You're not drawing the card, you're not getting the card, you're just seeing it. So this is absolutely capturing the flavor of someone torturing somebody to get information out of them, and the artwork and the name, of course, match up really nicely. Is it a little dark for Hearthstone? Yeah, maybe. I mean, we have like crazy skeletons and stuff going on, so I'm gonna let it fly. Maybe Hearthstone would be scared to make a torture themed card. I could certainly see that, but beyond that, it just captures everything so well, and it lines up with the name and priest so beautifully. This sort of informational asset style we've seen with Chameleos, and now with Madame Lazul. Torture Master Grazka would fit in really nicely. Also, just that health total alone is really cool for priest, right? Where they can work with it to buff it. So, some kind of buff priest, control priest, mid-range priest might be able to utilize a card like this nicely. Not everybody's going to want to run this, right? Because it's just a 1/6. It's not a great stat line for 3 mana without taunt. It's just informational, so some decks that don't care about information, they have their own game plan perhaps, and don't really need to worry too much about their opponent's style of play or next cards. That won't help them. So again, a card I don't think is ridiculously powerful, would probably fall by the wayside in a lot of different decks. Just feels like a Hearthstone card. It does a lot of things right. So Rafam's Apprentice, thank you for creating a neat little idea here with Torture Master Grazka. Up next, well, let's take a look at Arrow Volley from Iron Shadow, a 4 mana hunter spell. It's a twin spell, and it reads deal 2 damage to all enemy minions. So we have here sort of a, weaker consecration, if you will, because it's not doing damage to the enemy face, but it's a twin spell, which means you get to use it multiple times. And I think that's really important for Hunter specifically, because in the past, Hunter has had a problem with card draw. They often can't seem to keep a full hand of stuff. That's a little bit less of an issue nowadays with things like Master's Call. But if you're running a lot of spells like Arrow Volley and you want to maybe use like spell damage or some other support for Hunter, then Master's Call is not really going to help you much, right? That's for minions specifically, and beast minions even more specifically. So I think having access to a twin spell here that like helps a Hunter fight through the mid game, clean up boards, could shift that Hunter style of play a little bit more towards control as opposed to always leaning on aggro and mid-range, because this card gives you resource advantage because of twin spell, so it's just keeping cards in hand, and it's a removal spell. And we know with Rexar, sometimes dealing 2 damage to all enemy minions can feel like a pretty solid play, particularly if it happens earlier on turn 4. Consecration often used the same way. So Arrow Volley just fits that hunter feel. Like when I see hunters in World of Warcraft, they're doing this all the time. They're killing tons of little things with all kinds of AoE spells. We haven't really seen that a lot with Hunter and Hearthstone yet. There's of course the explosive shots, but it's usually smaller numbers of minions, whereas this is a lot of things, the entire board perhaps. So to me, I think this fits really well. It's a great example of how to utilize Twin Spell to sort of shore up a class's weaknesses a little bit without being too strong. You know, there might have been a temptation to make this 3 mana or make it just like a straight consecration, but I think it fits exactly in between there to make it feel balanced while still strong enough to be seen in competitive play. Moving on here, we have the Rallying Commander, this evil-looking leader from Red Stake. She's a 5 mana 4/4, and her battle cry reads, if you control all lackeys, deal 10 damage to all enemies. So I guess she's sort of leading the shenanigans here for the Evil League when they're fighting in Dalaran or attacking Dalaran. And if you happen to get all the lackeys together, she's going to rally them all and deal 10 damage to everything across from you. And that is a ridiculous upside, right? Like, dealing 10 damage to everything is so strong. That's almost always going to be a board clear, and it's like a pyroblast to the face to boot, all for 5 mana. But keep in mind, you got to control all of the lackeys. They've got to be in play on board. Now, there are 5 of them currently. So what that means is if you have all 5 and you have the Rallying Commander in hand, that's a 6-card combo to set this up. And of course, the lackeys interact with one another a little bit. But keep in mind, the Evolve lackey, you'd have to play it first. Otherwise, it's going to be evolving things. So you couldn't have other minions on board. There are all these little things sort of getting in the way a little bit. And you have to get each of the lackeys, which is not always going to be guaranteed because you're getting random lackeys added to your hand. You might get duplicates, etc. So I think this is a pretty hard condition to achieve as we understand it today. It's also been teased that additional lackeys would be added in future expansions. So this card would just get worse and worse over time and might become impossible at some future point. But maybe that's fine. Maybe this is just designed to be an option in Rise of Shadows where you can maybe create some kind of crazy scenario in a lackey style deck. But I think because it's so hard to achieve that, because you'd have to really build your deck around it to support it, I think it's okay that the outcome is so ridiculously strong, because all those conditions being met along the way are really challenging. And even then, it's not necessarily a game-winning output, because you just kind of have a board twisting nether you right back and you're kind of behind again. So to me, Rallying Commander offers a cool way to synergize with lackeys, maybe helps you support that deck, but probably a card that would never really see any sort of significant play based on the lackey generating cards we've seen thus far, so it still feels balanced but kind of flavorful and fun. Next up, let's talk about Recruitment Trials from Mr. Geddes. This would be a 1-mana Warlock spell where you destroy a friendly minion and you add 3 random lackeys to your hand. So if our last card needs lackeys, this would be a cool way to create them. And I love the flavor of this card. You know, we've got Rafam out there recruiting all these different lackeys to help him, or the Evil League recruiting all these lackeys. And it's like, all right, let's bring in 4 lackeys here, 4 people to see if they can be lackeys, right? One of them didn't make the cut. He didn't meet the trials. So we kill him. He's dead. We destroy that friendly minion. And then we get the other 3 lackeys that we've recruited. So I think this is cool. We're sacrificing 1 because they didn't make the cut. We're getting 3 added to our hand. And you might think, man, a 1-mana spell to generate 3 resources, that's pretty cool. But remember, you're sacrificing something, right? You're trading it off. But Warlock sometimes likes sacrificing things. So in that egg style or sacrifice style deck, card like Recruitment Trials offers a way to support it while also fitting the flavor and mechanic of lackeys into the class. So to me, this is exactly what a lackey generating Warlock spell would look like. I think it hits all the marks, flavor and balance and mechanics. So Mr. Geddes, you knocked it out of the park with this one. So now that we know how Warlocks would add lackeys to their hand, how would Warriors do it? Well, I have I Want You for Evil here from Blue Zombie Blood, a 2-mana Warrior spell that very simply just adds 3 random lackeys to your hand. Now, that might feel a little simpler after looking at the very last card, but we have a clue that this feels really realistic because the artwork featured in this card is actually from the new expansion. It's artwork that Blizzard released, and it's very clearly Dr. Boom referencing the, you know, Uncle Sam American I Want You poster where you're recruiting troops back in the day. And I Want You for Evil is the name of the card, which fits perfectly. And I think it would just be a straight up, you know, just add some stuff to your hand. I don't think it needs to be extra. And it's Dr. Boom on the poster, so it feels like a warrior card. And I think the numbers here are perfect. 2 mana for 3 lackeys feels pretty good. Now, admittedly, right, like, you know, drawing 3 cards for 2 mana would be great, but lackeys are less than a card. They're not as good as a card. So you have to fit in somewhere. You could maybe make this 1 mana, but if you look at the last card, right, like that required a little bit of a sacrifice to feel good at 1 mana. So I think 2 mana just hits the mark. So the artwork here we know is real. The name feels perfect, and I think the numbers are exactly where they should be. So Blue Zombie Blood here kind of just got this card in the video based on like precision and realism more than anything else. It just feels exactly right. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for custom card review number 16 based on Rise of Shadows mechanics and themes. I liked a lot of these cards. I liked that we didn't have so many legendaries driving things. This time around, we had a much wider diversity of neutral and class cards, which is good. That said, I do think people focused really hard on mechanics when submitting their cards, not necessarily like the flavor of Dalaran as much. I didn't see that many cards referencing, you know, characters or things happening in Dalaran nearly as much as just twin spells and lackeys and so on, which I think the cards in the video probably reflected. But that's okay. Still some awesome designs. That said, I'm sure you're curious what it's going to be next time around. I want you guys to kind of still stick to the Rise of Shadows themes by making me a card based on a villain from pop culture. So it could be from any kind of pop culture. It could be like Darth Vader, Voldemort. It could be from World of Warcraft. You could make a World of Warcraft villain too. It doesn't matter as long as it's from a, you know, video game, movie, book, whatever it is. It should still look like a Hearthstone card, of course. It should reflect Hearthstone mechanics, but just something villainous because of the Rise of Shadows. So you can find all the details on that in the description below if you're curious what exactly I mean. There are more details down there in the submission form link. Check that out. But until then, thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.